on liberty. On liberty. So the second book that he has written is on liberty. And besides that, there are also many books like essays on some unsettled questions in political economy and principles of political economy, utilitarianism, women's suffrage, autobiography. These are some of the books written by John Stuart Mill. In today's class, we'll be discussing his views on liberty. As I have told you in the beginning itself, that he is a libertarian. He gives his ideas on liberty. His ideas on liberty have very widely quoted by many philosophers in many books. So he's a 19th century libertarian. He's a liberal philosopher. He belongs to a classical liberal school and modern liberal school. John Stuart Mill believed that liberty is very essential for the human living. Without liberty, dignified life is not possible. That's why he insisted that the government should grant liberty to each and every individual. Without liberty, the human life is as good as an animal's life, a life of a slave. That's why liberty is very essential for the survival of any human being. And he insisted that all governments, all constitutions, all the laws in every country should guarantee the liberty. So in his book on liberty, he has suggested that liberty also needed to be controlled. An unbridled liberty without limitations is not good. That's why liberty should be accompanied by reasonable restrictions. What do you mean by liberty? Liberty is a Latin word which means freedom in English. In English, we call it as freedom. In Latin, we call it as liberty. So he says, liberty is very essential for every human being. And without liberty, human life is miserable and human being subordinate himself to others without having freedom. That's why he gives more importance to liberty. But should individual have more liberty without the interference of the state? This is a big question. And John Stuart Mill believed that human beings should not have unbridled liberty, absolute liberty. The liberty of the human being should have certain reasonable restrictions. What restrictions does an individual need to have for his liberty? He says, every liberty or every right should be accompanied by certain reasonable restrictions. And he says, state is having the power to interfere into the affairs of the individual to control the misuse of liberty by the individual. If the individual tries to misuse his liberty, the state has the power to control the misuse of liberty by the individual. And here, he considered liberty is very essential. And for getting liberty, individual has to perform certain activities. He classified the activities into two types. With these activities only, human being acquires liberty. So these activities can be classified into two types. One is self-regarding actions. The other one is other regarding actions. The self-regarding actions and other regarding actions. What are the self-regarding actions? The self-regarding actions are those activities that are meant for the development of the individual. They are called as the self-regarding actions. The other regarding actions means the activities of the individual which are pointed towards others. He may force others to do something. He may pressurize some people to do certain things. He may use his force on others to do certain activities. They are called as other regarding actions. But John Stuart Mill believed that in all the self-regarding actions, individual is supreme, individual is sovereign, and the state should not interfere in all the activities of the individual. In all the activities with regard to the self-regarding actions, individual is supreme. But with regard to the other regarding actions, if the individual acts to influence others, that's called other regarding actions. So other regarding actions may warrant the misuse of liberty by the individual. That's why John Stuart Mill believed that in all other regarding actions of the individual, the state can interfere. So this is how he classified the activities of the individual into two types: self-regarding actions, other regarding actions. For example, what are self-regarding actions? My studies, my marriage, my family, my property. These are all my self-regarding actions. In all these matters, the state need not interfere in these activities. So in all the self-regarding actions of the individual is supreme. Individual need not, or the state should not interfere into the self-regarding activities of the individual. But simultaneously, individual may also have other regarding actions. What are these other regarding actions? When individual influence others, when individual forces others, when individual make others to act in certain manner, they are called as other regarding actions. Without the wishes or without the consent of others, individual may interfere in others' actions. Individual may hamper the freedom of other people. Individual may curtail the liberties and rights of other people with their actions. So John Stuart Mill believed that individual is supreme and his liberty is also supreme as far as the self-regarding actions are concerned. But individual's actions are questionable if individual misuses his liberty for the other regarding actions. So this is how he justified the interference of the state in all the other regarding actions of the individual. So in all the other regarding actions of the individual, the state can interfere into the matters of the individual and it can prevent him from misusing his liberty on others. So this is called as the state interference on liberty. John Stuart Mill justified the state interference against the misuse of liberty by an individual. Particularly in matters of others, individuals should not interfere. If the individual go on interfering in others' activities and he is misusing his liberty against others, then the state has the power to interfere into the internal activities of the individual, and the state can prevent the misuse of liberty by the individual. So this is how he considers liberty as very important. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Chepama, what is liberty according to John Stuart Mill?
యాక్చువల్లీ పీపుల్ కి అయితే లిబర్టీ ఉండాలి కానీ వితౌట్ లిమిటేషన్ లేకుండా అయితే ఉండకూడదు సార్. అంటే అబ్సల్యూట్ లిబర్టీ మస్ట్ నాట్ బి ఎంకరేజ్డ్. సో 2 టైప్స్ ఉన్నాయి. లిబర్టీ కోసం ఇండివిజువల్ 2 థింగ్స్ చేయాలి. సో సెల్ఫ్ రిగార్డింగ్ యాక్షన్స్ అండ్ అదర్ రిగార్డింగ్ యాక్షన్స్. self-regarding action కింద individual sovereign. So అందులో state has no interference. It only meant for development of individual. Other regarding actions వచ్చి individual force others to do something or some actions for him. So state can interfere in other regarding actions to control his
You are
liberty.
right. Well said. In all the self-regarding actions of the individual, the state can interfere.
Yes, sir.
But in all other regarding actions of the individual,
State can interfere.
in all the self-regarding actions of the individual,
So
state should not interfere. But in all other regarding actions of the individual,
State can
the interference of the state is justified. The
Yes.
state can interfere in other regarding actions of the individual. This is called as his conception of liberty. Now let us move on to the another topic, which was given by John Stuart Mill. This is on representative government. Mill has given his views on representative government. What is representative government? When people elect their representatives, those representatives form the government and rule the country. That is called as representative government. For example, the people are electing the Lok Sabha members. The Lok Sabha members are electing the Prime Minister. So Prime Minister and Council of Ministers are ruling the country. So this is called as the representative government. The people's representatives, they govern the country. That's called as the representative government. At the state level, we elect the MLAs, and MLAs elect the Chief Minister, and Chief Minister rules the state with the help of MLAs. This is called as the representative government. So according to John Stuart Mill, the representative government requires certain changes, requires certain reforms. What are these reforms? The first one is he supported proportional representation. Proportional representation means in every society there are different religious groups. Based on the population of different religious groups, the seats of the Lok Sabha can also be classified and divided. So this is called as proportional representation. Suppose there are 20% of women in the Indian population. So in the Lok Sabha, 20% of the seats should be allocated to women. Suppose there are 15% Muslims are there in India. So out of the total Lok Sabha seats, 15% of the seats should be allocated to Muslims. So based on the percentage of population, the seats of the Lok Sabha should be allocated to the respective parties. This he calls it as a representative government. As a result of this representative government, all sections of society will get their membership in the Lok Sabha. So the membership of the Lok Sabha is adequately represented by all sections of society. But in the popular elections, people elect only majority people. They do not elect the minority people. So minority people cannot enter into the Lok Sabha. Here with the proportional representatives, in majorities and minorities, both can enter into Lok Sabha. So he supported the proportional representation. So he suggested that based on the proportion of population in the society, and that proportion of seats should be allocated to that particular religion. So this is called as proportional representation. The second one is John Stuart Mill wanted women to vote. He wanted the voting rights to women. In fact, during 19th century, women were treated as secondary grade citizens and they were not given respect and dignity. As a result, women were subordinated to men. In fact, all the societies in the world were male-dominated societies. But women also have intelligence, also have qualification, and that's why John Stuart Mill suggested that women need to have representation, and women need to have the right to vote. Women should have the right to vote. So according to John Stuart Mill, all people need to have the right to vote, irrespective of gender, irrespective of caste, irrespective of religion. All people may need to have the right to vote, according to John Stuart Mill. And third one is, he wanted certain intellectual qualifications for MLAs and MPs. So that means MLAs and MPs, uneducated people should not become MLAs and MPs. That's why he says there must be some education qualifications for holding the position of MLA and MP. So in this context, he suggested that people needed to be having some qualification for contesting in the elections. Say, for example, for contesting the elections to Lok Sabha, a graduation degree is required. For contesting the elections of State Assembly, a 10th class qualification is required. For contesting the post of village sarpanch, a 10th class or 8th class are required. For a board member, some 5th class qualification is required. So this is how, when the government declares certain essential qualifications for the political activists, then that would give qualifications to all the members of Lok Sabha and assemblies. So this is how he suggested certain qualifications for the members, certain intellectual qualifications for the members. Intellectual qualifications in terms of educational qualifications. He wanted all the members are to be elected and are to be eligible to get elected only if they possess certain education qualifications. Just like in the jobs, we are having the education qualifications. Even for the post of MLA and MP also, we need to have certain education qualifications for MLA and MP. So he suggested that education qualifications are very much required for people's representatives to contest in the elections. And fourthly, he advised plural voting. What do you mean by plural voting? Plural voting means if a person is qualified, if a person is socially respectable, if a person is paying huge income tax to the government, if a person is creating jobs for the people, if a person is paying taxes to the government, then that person should have more votes than only one vote. John Locke and John Stuart Mill believed that people need to have certain qualifications. So likewise, plurality of voting also is required. He wanted that the same person having more qualifications should be given the more value of votes. If he votes, his vote should be considered as 100 or 1000. So that means the vote of an intelligent person cannot be equated with the same value as a commoner's voting. So the value of a qualified person should be given a high value. So that's how he suggested that plurality of voting. Plurality of voting means if a person is qualified, if a person is paying taxes to the government, if a person is acquiring respect in the society, if a person has all the eligible qualifications, then his vote should be more. He should have given more votes. Instead of one vote, he should have been given 100 votes or 200 votes. If he votes, his vote can be considered as 100 votes. So that's how he suggested the plural voting system. This is called as plural voting system. What is plural voting system?
A person is socially qualified, like with more qualification, paying tax or providing employment, should have more votes than one vote.
So this is called as plural voting system.
Plural voting.
And he also believed that all the members of parliament should be given election expenses. The election expenses for the persons getting elected should be borne by the government. He wanted the government to bear the election expenses. Otherwise, rich people only will get elected and poor people will not get elected. So as a result, people will not have the right to contest in the elections. So to make the right to contest in the election accessible both to rich people and poor people, he suggested that the election expenses or the expenditure for the elections should be borne by the government, the state. And John Stuart Mill also suggested certain labor reforms. Labor reforms. What are the labor reforms that he has suggested? He suggested a limited number of hours of work for the laborers in the industries. Previously, the industrialists and capitalists used to force the people to work for 14 hours, 15 hours, sometimes 20 hours a day. But John Stuart Mill suggested that workers should have only 8 hours of work, maximum 9 hours of work, not beyond that. If a person is not given leisure for sleep, his health may get deteriorated. That's why he suggested that the hours of work for the people should be very limited, such as 8 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, likewise. So he wanted the government to fix the hours of work for every laborer in the company or corporation. So he suggested the corporate style of working hours. He wanted people to have only 6 hours of work or 7 hours of work, and people should be given rest after the 6 hours or 7 hours of work. So this is called as the labor reform. And he also suggested that there should be one weekly holiday for every worker. Generally, Sunday is a holiday for all the industries and business establishments. But during 19th century and 18th century, when industrial revolution has taken place, industrialists have never given any holiday, weekly holiday for the people. That's why he suggested that people need to have a weekly holiday, preferably the Sunday. So these are called as the liberal reforms or labor reforms. So you please tell me what are the labor reforms he has suggested? Hello?
Yes, sir. Limited hours of work for labor. If rest is not given, their health deteriorates. He wanted the government to fix the hours of work for labor. So there must be a weekly holiday. And 17th and 18th centuries లో ఇండస్ట్రియల్ రెవల్యూషన్ ఉన్నటప్పుడు సో టైం అనేది వాళ్ళకి వీక్లీ హాలిడే అనేది వాళ్ళు ఇచ్చేవాళ్ళు కాదు సార్.
Wonderful. So this is how he insisted that there must be a weekly holiday for all the workers. And also there should be hours of work. And he also suggested that the profits of the company should be given to workers as bonus. Bonus should be given to each and every worker based on the quantum of profits that a company gets. If the company gets more profits, more bonus should be given. If the company gets less profits, less bonus will be given. But based on the profits of the industry, individuals should be given the bonuses. This is also another important aspect. These are called as the labor reforms. They are called as labor reforms. And John Stuart Mill suggested open ballot system. He was opposite to the secret ballot system, and he was in support of the open ballot system. In the open ballot system, people can raise the hands in the open election, and they can tell their choice of candidates. So he suggested, for the probity and moral standards of the society, elections should not be secret. Elections should be held openly, and every voter is required to give his option in an open manner, open house manner. So this is how John Stuart Mill suggested that open ballot system should be there in the place of the closed ballot system. What do you mean by open ballot system?
So every voter has the vote and they can open ga vote cheyochu, sir, without any secrecy.
Yes, yes. And he also wanted more powers to House of Commons in England Parliament. In England Parliament, there are two houses, House of Lords, House of Commons. House of Lords is like our Rajya Sabha. House of Commons is our Lok Sabha. House of Commons is directly elected by people, and House of Lords is elected indirectly by royal families in the Lok Sabha, in the British Parliament. But John Stuart Mill wanted that House of Commons, because common people elect the representative to power. So House of Commons need to have more powers than to House of Lords. In fact, House of Lords is only a suggestive body. It suggests the legislations. But House of Commons, which is directly elected by people and is responsible to the Lok Sabha or the House of Lords. So that's why in British Constitution, he wanted the House of Lords should have less powers and House of Commons need to have more powers. And likewise, John Stuart Mill also suggested that local self-governments should be encouraged. What do you mean by local self-governments?
Maybe panchayats, village panchayats ala untayi kada sir.
Yeah, village panchayat, mandal parishads, jilla parishads, municipalities, nagar panchayats, municipal corporations, municipal councils, metropolitan councils, port trusts. So these are called as the local self-governments. So he suggested that local self-government should be strengthened so that the local problems of the people can be solved by the local self-governments only. So this is also another important aspect. And local self-governments also encourage more participation of people into the voting process and democratic process. And he also wanted that election should be held once in 5 years or 4 years, not every year. He is opposite to annual elections to House of Commons. In Britain, there are so many years back, the elections to the House of Commons was based on annual elections. But John Stuart Mill suggested that these elections should be held once in 3 years or once in 4 years, just like the British Parliament is elected for 5 years in the recent past. So he wanted the British Parliament to elect the representatives, the people to elect the representation once in 4 years or 5 years. He is opposite to the annual elections. According to John Stuart Mill, annual elections will lead to more expenditure. So that's why he wanted a periodical elections for the parliament and not just annual elections. So friends, these are some of the points given by John Stuart Mill on representative government. This is all given on representative government. Now let us recapitulate these points once again. The first one is John Stuart Mill wanted a proportional government in which all the communities in the society, all the religions in the community will have share in the parliament according to the population. If the population is higher, the representation is also higher. If the population is lower, the representation is also lower. So that's why Gandhiji has suggested that John Stuart Mill has suggested that proportional representation should be there. Okay. Secondly, he argued in favor of women's voting. Women's voting should be there. And John Stuart Mill also suggested functional representation. Functional representation. What do you mean by functional representation? Functional representation means representation based on occupations. Some doctors, some teachers, some lawyers, some industrialists, some agriculturists. Likewise, the number of professions that are there in the society will reflect the number of seats in the Lok Sabha or the parliament. So the parliament should reserve seats to all the professions of the society according to their population. So farmers, teachers, lawyers, accountants, likewise private employees. So this is how a representation should be given on the basis of employment opportunities of the people. People also need to have various professions. So he suggested that these professions also need to be represented in the parliament. And women also should be represented according to John Stuart Mill. Mill suggested that women's representation is mandatory in British Parliament. So that means women also have the intellectual capacities, women also are qualifications, women also have the capabilities. So women's representation is inevitable in the society because women's population is growing day by day. So he wanted the representation of women in all the elected bodies, parliament, assemblies, local self-governments, and all other things. And thirdly, John Stuart Mill suggested intellectual qualifications for the public representatives. All the public representatives need to have certain intellectual qualifications. And he also suggested plurality of voting. Plurality of voting means he wanted the person with capacities, more capacities, should be given more votes. The same person should be given more votes. Suppose if there is a person who is very expert in agriculture, at the same time, he is also paying taxes to the government. And likewise, he is a degree graduate holder. So due to all these things, his vote, the value of his vote should be more and higher. So the plurality of voting was suggested by John Stuart Mill. And John Stuart Mill also suggested that the election expenditure of the parliament members should be borne by the government itself. And likewise, the parliament should provide women's suffrage, the women's right to vote, and more opportunities for the women to contest in the elections. And John Stuart Mill favored open ballot system. He is opposed to the secret ballot system. If the ballot system is secret ballot system, people may cheat the political parties, so people may not vote properly. That's why he wanted an open ballot system. And he wanted more powers to House of Commons than House of Lords. Between these two houses, House of Commons need to have more powers because it is directly elected by people. So it reflects the public opinion. So the house that reflects the public opinion, that is called the House of Commons, should have more powers than House of Lords. That suggestion also made by John Stuart Mill. And likewise, he suggested the local self-governments. The government should encourage the local self-governments like Gram Panchayat, Mandal Parishad, Jilla Parishad, Nagar Panchayats, municipalities, municipal councils, municipal corporations, metropolitan councils. So this is how the local self-government should be encouraged and people should be given more opportunities to participate in the affairs of the local self-governments. And likewise, he rejected the annual elections to the House of Commons. He suggested periodical elections, at least once in 4 years or 5 years, to the House of Commons. Hello?
Yes, sir.
You please tell me what are the reforms that he has suggested in the representative government?
So proportional representations are based on the population, percentage population of religious groups, seats to be allocated in the parliament, women to vote, and intellectual qualification means educational qualification for contesting candidates, and plural voting. So person is socially qualified, so should have more vote instead of one vote. Next, election expenses must be borne by the government, and labor reforms in the limited hours of work for labor and weekly holiday for workers, and profits of the company should be given bonus to the workers. So he opposed secret ballot system and supported open ballot system. So he actually suggested that House of Commons should have more power than House of Lords, and encouraged local self-government, opposed to annual or yearly elections. So he suggested periodic elections to reduce the expenditure of government, and based on profession of society, so representation should be made. So women's representation is mandatory in British Parliament. That's it, sir.
Wonderful. These are the reforms that he has suggested in the representative government. So he has written a book called Representative Government, in which he has suggested these reforms. So if you turn to page number 102 in the textbook, there are certain questions here. What are Mill's views on liberty? This question will definitely come in the examination. And likewise, examine Mill's views on liberty and representative government. Sometimes these two questions may be clubbed, may be mixed. His views on liberty and his views on representative government. But many times these two issues are separated and these two are two different questions. His views on representative government may come as an essay type question, and his views on liberty may come as a short answer question. So the first question is important, and likewise the third question is important. Okay.
Sir.
This is all about John Stuart Mill. Now let us briefly discuss about Hegel. Hegel is a 19th century philosopher, and Hegel is a German philosopher. His philosophy is so complex that sometimes even Hegel himself cannot understand his own philosophy. So that's how his philosophy is filled with linguistic jaggery. So now let us see what is Hegel's philosophy. Hegel is born in Germany and he wrote many books like Phenomenology of Mind and the Science of Logic, Philosophy of Right, Philosophy of History, Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences, and various other things. So his books are very complex. His philosophy itself is very complex. And he first gives us an idea of dialectics and spirit. According to Hegel, spirit means there are four things that move history, according to Hegel. But one is the idea, the second one is the spirit, the third one is history, and the fourth one is divine will. So these are the four things that move the history. So spirit is the force that motivates the people to do certain things and not to do certain things. That is called as the spirit. As a result of spirit, human beings get idea. And idea is transformed into thesis. If all the people having the same idea, that is called as thesis. For every thesis, there is antithesis. For every antithesis, there is again synthesis. So that is called as his dialectical method. In the next class, we'll discuss his dialectical method. But in today's class, let us discuss briefly about his views on the state. According to Hegel, the state is like an organic body. He gives utmost importance to the state. And he wants all the people to be obedient to the state. Law obedience, obedience to the state are very essential according to Hegel. And any deviation from the obedience of state will only lead to anarchy in the society. That's why all people need to be obedient to the state. And he says, state is like a god. It's a march of God unto the earth. The state is like a march of God unto the earth. That's why people should obey the state. Any disobeying of state, disobedience to state, will only lead to anarchy in the society. That's why state should be given more powers. State is like a human body, and all the people are like human body parts. Just like no body part will survive without the body, individual also will not survive without the state. As long as the body part is within the body of a particular person, then only the body part will get influence. Once the body parts are alienated from the state, they lose their importance, they lose their existence. That's why he wanted the state to be united and state to be like a human body. And individuals are like human body parts. This is called as organic theory. He compared the state with a human body, and he also compared the functions of individual with the functions of body parts. So by comparing human existence in the state with the body, human body, he has laid down the seeds for the organic theory of state, in which he says state is greater, state is superior, state cannot be questioned or challenged, and the authority of state is final. So that's why he gives more importance to the state. So state is like a divine will. It's like a divine will, and it is the God's command. It's a march of God unto the earth, according to Hegel. It's a state is an institution of God. It was marched onto the earth. So he wanted the state to be fulfilling the needs of the people, and people also need to concentrate on the capacities of the state. So the state will not do injustice to the individual, and individual should always be obedient to the state. So friends, these are some of the opinions expressed by Hegel. In page number 109, there are certain questions here. What are the main features of idealism? And what is Hegel's contribution to political philosophy? These two questions are very important. Now let us take up the second question. What is Hegel's contribution to political philosophy? Hegel's contribution to political philosophy is the theory of idealism. The theory of idealism believes that state is superior, state is greater, and individual is inferior. And since individual is inferior, individual should be subordinate himself to the state. State has the authority and power to give commands to the people. And it is the duty of the people to respect the commands of the state. So this is called as the theory of idealism. And he also wanted people to be patriotic and submissive, subordinated to the state. So this is how he gives more importance to state and less importance to the individual. And he says that all the people, all the individuals in the society should obey the commands of the state. Disobeying the commands of the state will only lead to anarchy in the society. That's why Hegel is believed that all people should have patriotic zeal within them, and everybody should be a patriot. In fact, the theory of idealism expressed by Hegel was taken up very much by the two dictators, Hitler and Mussolini. In fact, Hitler have made research on this, and he also wrote a book called Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf is the book written by Hitler. And in that Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, he was also referring to Hegel's theory of idealism. So idealism has only produced the dictators like Hitler, Mussolini, and others. So idealism wants people to be subordinate to the state. So subordination of individual to the state is very much required, and that is called as idealism. In idealism, people tend to be very patriotic. People need to be very patriotic. And with that patriotism only, people succeeded in their lives. The state fulfills the demands of the people if the people are patriotic towards the state. So he wanted people to be patriotic, and he gives more importance to state and society, and individual is inferior to state, whereas the state is superior. So this is called as the Hegelian theory of state. And Hegel compared human body, the state with human body. Just like the human body controls all the human body parts, the state also controls all the human body parts. So he compared human body and state. This is called as the organic theory of state. The organic theory of state was given by Hegel. This organic theory of state is also called as idealism. In idealism, he gives more powers to the state and less freedom to the individual. He wanted people to ask for patriotism, and patriotism and nationalism towards the state are the only means through which individual can realize his freedoms and his rights. So this is how he is called as the idealist philosopher, and idealism was propagated by Hegel. So in the next class, we are going to discuss the socialist ideology of Karl Marx and
సార్ డయాలెక్టిక్స్ గురించి చెప్తా అన్నారు కదా సార్.
హలో
సార్ డయాలెక్టిక్స్ గురించి చెప్తా అన్నారు కదా సార్.
ఏదమ్మా?
డయాలెక్టిక్ మెథడ్ సార్.
డైలెక్టికల్ మెథడ్ గురించి మనం నెక్స్ట్ క్లాస్ లో చెప్పుకుందాము.
ఓకే సార్. అంటే ఈ చాప్టర్ కి సంబంధించి ఐడియలిజం ఫీచర్స్ అండ్ కాంట్రిబ్యూషన్ టు పొలిటికల్ ఫిలాసఫీ అన్నవి కన్సిడర్ చేయొచ్చా సార్?
ఇంపార్టెంట్.
Okay,
Second
sir.
and third questions are very important.
Okay, sir.
Okay, if any doubts are there, you please make phone calls.
Okay, sir.
We'll discuss.
ఓకే సార్, థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. అంటే ఇందులో చాలా టైప్ అంటే కొన్ని మిక్స్డ్ అప్ ఉన్నాయి సార్. అంటే వేరే అదర్ వాళ్ళతో కంపేర్ చేసి ఉన్నాయి సార్ క్వశ్చన్స్ కొన్ని.
అదే I'll give you clarity on this. Okay.
ఓకే సార్. ఓకే సార్, థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్.
Thank you.